really bailed me out one year when the one that I had lined up a week before the event, the agent called and said he's not doing it. And I called George and said, you know anybody that might do it? And George said, hey, I'll do it. And everybody loves them.
But I'm going to have to leave right now.
We'll see why in a minute. He's got a new book that's really great, and I'm sure you'll be reading from it. And you'll just see why George is so wonderful in it.
That's good. Aren't the best introductions the briefest? But really, you don't want to hear where I got my undergrad and then my grad. You're not interested in that? Never mind. So thank you, Alan.
I actually do want to hear where you did.
No,
Actually, I just want to fix
those are the worst.
Bring it up a little bit.
Okay.
All right.
And thanks to Alan, Evie, for having me here, and thanks to all of you for coming out. And really, what a treat to get to read with Carrie and to get to read with David Lee tonight. I am thrilled by that opportunity. And all of us poets who travel around giving readings, we haven't done this for 2 years. And it's just starting, and to have a chance to, I mean, believe me, Zoom is the worst. It is exactly the same as walking up to the wall and talking to it. That's my feeling about Zoom. So to actually be here in real life and getting a chance to meet with all of you is thrilling. And since last time I was here, I've learned a poetry reading joke to tell at the beginning of poetry readings. And I think everyone sort of on the poetry circuit has known this joke for years, but I just learned it, so I'm going to use it to warm you up. So here it is. Don't groan if you've heard this a million times. But so it's open night mic at the Florence Poetry Club, and the featured reader is Dante. This is kind of an English major joke. And Dante, gets his glass of water, unscrews it, walks up to the mic and says, I'm just going to read 3 poems tonight. So this first, I'll read a few more than 3. This first poem, I'm like the world's oldest, fairly new dad. I have a 5-year-old and a 9-year-old. And my second son, this didn't happen for my first son, but my second son, I watched his birth. I was in the birthing room. And those of you, I know the women with kids were in the birthing room. But those of you, including the men who have watched this astonishing thing, I'm sure you would agree, it's probably the most remarkable thing that can happen to you, watching this event occur. There's just simply nothing more beautiful, nothing more miraculous as you stand in that room and watch this new being enter the world. Miraculous to you, maybe not to everyone in that room. And that's what this poem is about. My watching my son get born. The poem is called Push. I'm trying to look as if I'm suffering. I have this anguished expression on my face, but it's wasted since I'm wearing a surgical mask. And anyway, the focus here is really on my wife, and the doctor is right there between her legs, and he's shouting, "Push!" And my wife is doing this astounding thing. She's pushing yet another human being into the world, a world that so far seems to be pushing back. And the baby's heartbeat is down to 90. So the doc says, well, I think maybe one more try, then we do the cesarean. So things in the room really are a bit tense. It's definitely a moment that demands a lot of attention, and my wife is gathering whatever shreds of strength remain in the shaking, exhausted sleeve of flesh her body has become. The blood and sweat and fluids everywhere, and this is it. When I hear the attending nurse standing just behind me saying to this guy in scrubs standing next to her, I think he's the anesthesiologist's assistant, well, just because Karen says she has a boyfriend doesn't necessarily mean she won't go out with you. And the guy says, his voice rising because my wife really is screaming quite loudly at this point, yeah, okay, I guess I should give it a try. I mean, what's the worst that can happen other than getting shot down and looking like a total fool? And the nurse says, as the doctor is shouting, push! Yeah, but hasn't it been like a long dry spell for you? Aren't you getting a little desperate here? And the guy laughs, and my wife screams again, and the doctor says, yes! And into the world comes the bloody head, followed by the naked, lovely, bloody little boy, insanely ill-prepared for any of this. And I guess the guy actually is going to ask Karen out. And I say, go for it. And a very short poem directly related to that poem. Is just a teeny little poem, but it seems right here. It's called How I Met Your Mother, obviously. It's for my kids. I saw her at a party, walked up and said, how would you feel about getting married? Buying a house, enduring the agony of childbirth a couple of times, watching a lot of Netflix together, dining out. I'm thinking specifically of the spaghetti at Rigere's, getting a dog, negotiating mortgages, and finally sitting by me in those last days, arranging the funeral, tidying up, then starting your strange new life, the one without me. How does that sound? And she sipped her mojito and said, what are we waiting for? And it really happened just like that. So, here's a poem from a lot of the poems I write come from news articles, and this is a true story. I read it in the newspaper about a year ago. The poem is called Polar Bear. A father died heroically in some Alaskan park, trying to save his kids from a polar bear. Long ago, when his mother gave birth one afternoon in Barstow, California, could anyone have prophesied, as in an old myth, that the baby crying at her breast would one day be killed and partially eaten by a polar bear? Has anyone from Barstow, California, been killed and partially eaten by a polar bear? Yet her son was. He looked up from making camp, pitching the tent or lighting his Coleman stove, and there it was, white and immense, his fate. And he died heroically and was partially eaten. Of course, the bear had to be killed. The ranger shot it, which makes sense. You can't have polar bears running around in the wilderness. The wilderness is a place for dads and kids and Coleman stoves. Polar bears just kind of ruin the whole thing. As for the bear, it didn't die heroically. It just got shot and fell over and was sent to a lab for testing. It's a weird poem. This is a poem for my mother. I My father died when I was fairly young, and I was raised by my single mom, I and my two sisters. And she worked so hard to raise us, we just didn't get a chance to see her much. She was a nurse. And yet her great pleasure at night, after she got us fed and got us to bed, was to read. And she loved reading these great classic novels, Charles Dickens. I remember her reading, of all things, Moby Dick. She'd sit up late reading these novels, and this is for my mom. It's called Anna Karenina. My mother was long dead before I was old enough to ask her who she was. But I'm reading Anna Karenina, which I recall her burning through late nights after a double shift, after the insertion of suppositories and the emptying of bedpans, after she fried us up some pork chops and opened a can of applesauce and a can of hominy and a can of fruit cocktail. She'd sit down with her cigarettes and red wine and read these big novels that took her away from worrying all day about money and into whatever Emma Bovary or Eleanor Dashwood was dealing with. She disappeared into French winters. She walked down London streets or sat quietly with Anna in her parlor. I look around in the novel for her cigarettes tonight, her glass of wine, anything she might have left behind. So, has anyone here won a MacArthur Genius Grant? Am I the only? Just me? Okay. On to the next poem. No, I have not won a MacArthur Genius Grant. But I would like to, and every artist in this room would like to. If you don't know, there are two things you get from it. First, $500,000. But I don't need the money, I teach, so. But the cool thing is, everybody has to call you a genius. And so I think about this at home with my wife. Weren't you supposed to empty the kitty litter? Genius? Genius, time to take the trash out. She would have loved it. So no, I never won one, but I had sort of a close encounter. And that's what this poem is about. It's called Genius. It was nice being a genius, worth $500,000 for the 2 or 3 minutes it took me to walk back to my house from the mailbox, the envelope from the foundation trembling in my hand. Frankly, for the first minute, I was somewhat surprised at being a genius. I'd only published a couple of things at that point. I didn't even have a book. I was just a part-time lecturer at a small Midwestern college. But early into the second minute, I had fully embraced the fact of my genius. I mean, these guys know what they're doing, right? Who am I to tell the foundation its business? And I was already rehearsing the modest, hey, it's no big deal tone of voice I'd be using on the phone for the rest of the day as I called all my friends, and especially my enemies, to share the good news. But when I opened the letter and found it was merely a request for me to recommend someone else to be a genius, I lost interest and made myself a ham sandwich. And for you sort of apprentice writers or established writers, that last line, I made myself a ham sandwich, you can use to end any poem. It works with any poem. I tried it at the end of Paradise Lost, and it actually makes the poem stronger. So, and this is a poem for my dad. And I kid about this. I realize this is not funny, but I say to people at readings, people who haven't had kids yet, I say, if you want your kids to become poets, you should become alcoholics. Because it always works. I mean, I don't know any poets whose parents were not alcoholics. That was certainly the case with me. So my dad really had a terrible drinking problem. It then ended up killing him when he was in his mid-40s. And that ended up really being the subject I've written about more than anything else. This poem is called The Forge. I remember watching my father stop halfway up the driveway because my tricycle was blocking the way to the garage, and how he solved the problem by picking up the tricycle by the handlebars and smashing it through the windshield of our brand new family station wagon, his face red with scotch, his black tie and jacket flapping with effort, the tricycle making its way a little farther with each blow into the roomy interior of the latest model as the safety glass relented, the tricycle and the windshield both praiseworthy for their toughness, the struggle between them somehow making perfect sense in midday on our quiet suburban street, the windshield, the anvil, the trike, the hammer, the marriage, the forge, and failure glowing in the heat, beaten and tempered, slowly taking shape. So, really, I'm not going to read but a few more. So you go through life and you work hard and you study and you strive and you play by the rules, and maybe you arrive at a point where you're feeling pretty good about what you've achieved and what you've accomplished. But that delicate little structure called ego is so fragile and can so easily be destroyed. And that's what this poem is about. It's set in our local public pool in Cleveland. And it's called Horseplay. I am floating in the public pool, an older guy who has achieved much, including a mortgage, 2 children, and health insurance, including dental. I have a Premier Rewards Gold Card from American Express, and my car is large. I have traveled to Finland. In addition, I once met Toni Morrison at a book signing and made some remarks she found extremely interesting. And last month, I was the subject of a local news story called Recyclers, Neighbors Who Care. In short, I am not someone you would take lightly. But when I begin to playfully splash my wife, the teenage lifeguard raises her megaphone and calls down from her throne, "No horseplay in the pool." And suddenly I am 12 again. A pale worm at the feet of a blonde and suntan goddess. And I just wish my mom would come pick me up. So, I have noticed, so many poems are about aging. And as a poet, I write about aging as well. And I've just begun noticing that I'm just getting that first little bit of gray. The temples there. And this actually started a few years back, surprisingly enough. And I was visiting my sister in Santa Cruz, and she said, "George, you're graying pretty badly. Why don't you think about, coloring your hair, dyeing your hair? And I said, no, I'm not going to do that. You start down that trail, and there's no turning back. You're stuck with that for the rest of your life. But she kept nagging at me about this. I was there for 2 months, and finally we did it. We went down to the supermarket and bought the hair stuff, and I dyed my hair. And I just felt like such a fraud. It just looked so wrong, but I did get a poem out of that, and I wrote about it. And before I read it, I want to mention two things, very quickly. First, the second line of the poem is absolutely dreadful. And I know that. You don't have to tell me after the reading. It's quoting my sister, who's a business person, and that's how she actually talks in real life. So don't blame me. That's the second line. And the other thing is, of poems written in the last 10 years in America, this one probably has the best title. So the poem is called Grecian Temples. Grecian formula. All right, here it is. Because I'm getting pretty gray at the temples, which negatively impacts my earning potential, and does not necessarily attract vibrant young women with their perfumed bosoms to dally with me on the green hillside, I go out and buy some Grecian hair formula. And after the whole process, which involves rubber gloves, a tiny chemistry set, and perfect timing, I look great. I look very fresh and virile, full of earning potential. But when I take my 15-year-old beagle out for his evening walk, the contrast is unfortunate. Next to me, he doesn't look all that great. With his graying snout, his sort of faded, worn-out dog look. Makes me feel old walking around with a dog like that. It's not something a potential employer, much less a vibrant young woman with a perfumed bosom, would necessarily go for. So I go out and get some more Grecian hair formula. Light brown, my beagle's original color. And after all the rigmarole, he looks terrific. I mean, he's not going to win any friskiness contests, not at 15, but there's a definite visual improvement. The two of us walk virally around the block. The next day, a striking young woman at the bookstore happens to ask me about my parents, who are in fact long dead, due to the effects of age. They were very old, which causes death. But having dead old parents does not go with my virile, intensely fresh new look. So I say to the woman, my parents are fine. They love their active lifestyle in San Diego. Windsurfing, high life, a still vibrant sex life. And while this does not necessarily cause her to come dally with me on the green hillside, I can tell it doesn't exactly hurt my chances. I can see her imagining dinner with my sparkly, young-seeming mom and dad at some beachside restaurant where we would announce our engagement. Your son has great earning potential. She'd say to Dad, who would take a gander at her perfumed bosom and give me a wink, just like he used to back when he was alive and vibrant. Thank you so much. I'm going to read one last poem, and this one kind of comes between my father and my son. This poem, it goes back to a memory I have, a vivid memory of my dad, who would come home and pick me up and hold me up near the ceiling and just dangle me in the air. And I'd never forget that, just that feeling of being held in his hands above everything. The poem is called Weather. My father would lift me to the ceiling in his big hands and ask, "How's the weather up there?" And it was good, the weather of being in his hands, his breath of scotch and cigarettes, his face smiling from the world below. "Oh, Daddy," was the lullaby I sang back down to him as he stood on earth, my great white-shirted father, home from work, his gold wristwatch and wedding band gleaming as he held me above him for as long as he could before his strength failed. Down there in the world I find myself standing in tonight, my little boy looking down from his flight below the ceiling, cradled in my hands, his eyes wide and already staring into the distance, beyond the man, asking him again and again, "How's the weather up there?" Thank you.
A little better than Zoom, I think, for everybody. That was great, George. Thank you. And to top off the evening, David Lee, Evie and I did a trip long ago, rafting the Grand Canyon, and one of the guides would give us bedtime poems, and they were from Dave. And I just fell in love with the poem, so being the shy person that I am, I found out his phone number and called him up when I got home and said, "We have this poetry festival." This is the year after the famous Lois Kempton incident that some of you might remember. And I said, "I'd like to invite you to a poetry festival." And he said, "Okay." And I said, "I can't pay you much." And he said, "You're going to pay me?" I said, "Yeah." And Dave came, and it was just great, and we've become really close friends over the years. How many times have you met? A lot.
I don't count very high.
He was part of Wellspring from the inception, and I could just imagine taking a poetry class from him in college. It would just be amazing. So, David Lee.
What a delight. I am coming out of retirement. I took a vow. I'm really good at taking vows, not so good at keeping them, but I said I wasn't going to do this anymore. I just got too damn old and decrepit. I couldn't, as some people like to say, get it up. And but I am going to say I'm on tour. I have a new book. It's a selected poems. It's got pieces from all of my books over the last 50 years. As a matter of fact, the first two poems in this book, I started them exactly 50 years ago this month. I'm not going to read, I'm only going to read one thing from this book tonight. I'm going to read something else. It's a little bit of a command performance. Al has a remarkable ability to get his own way. I sort of told him when I was thinking about reading, he said, "Oh, that's really nice, but actually, that's not what you're going to do." And today is Earth Day, Rachel Carson Day. So he said, "I want you to read something from your landscape work." Oh, I'm delighted to do that, absolutely. Then he said, "And then I want one of your," this is the good news and the bad news. "I'm only going to read 2 poems. Oh, God, one of them long." He wants me to read from one of my narrative poems. I know he's a narrative poet. So here we go. This is it. Now, I want to pay homage to my 2 cohorts. One of the bribes for coming here was to meet George. I wanted to meet him for many years. So that was something that was very nice. And I knew Carrie because I had seen her on Zoom. And I know we all disparage Zoom, but I want to tell you, there's a fellow sitting back here who's a genius, who did a really, really good job and I didn't want to be part of that either, but I'm sure glad I did it. Got to do it, to learn how to do it, and I had a master working with it that way. But I'll come back to Carrie. I met her on that Zoom, and then I saw her on something else, and then Jan and I went to see our son over his spring break, and every time we go see John, he's got a stack of books for me to read, new poets he's in love with. I'm not kidding you. Top book on the list was hers. And he just said, I've met this woman. I think she's a wonderful human and a really good poet. And I don't trust his opinion about anything. He's my kid. And I found out he was right. She's just pretty damn good. So it's a pleasure, you two, to be here with you. All right. Jan always tells me before the reading, get behind I need a dark podium, but she said, check your fly. Okay. And then she says, and try not to talk so much between the poems. They're not dull. Well, all right. I want to say one other thing. One other reason I wanted to come back here, and I mean this, I do mean this. I look around this room, and there's a measurable percentage of the people I call friends on this planet in this room. That's a fact. There are people here I don't like, I love. I love coming here to be back with them. And, I can keep pointing. And, of course, Al and Debbie, they're family now. We curse against each other. So, all right. Shut up, Dave. Let's go. I'm going to start off with the landscape poem. This is the one thing from the new book I'm going to read tonight. I wrote this for my wife. She didn't even know it until 2 days ago. I mentioned it when I read it in a group, and she didn't. She said that. And I said, good God Almighty, in your room where you put those puzzles together, there's a 3x5 framed portrait of it that says for Jam with Love, and it's this poem. This is the Pine Valley Psalm, but it could just as easily be the Hocking Hills Psalm. And I've thought that when I come here. I loved Pine Valley. That was my sanctum sanctorum where I wrote 5 of my books. But many of the things I write begin right here or in the memory of here. I love this place. Love the place and the people. So Pine Valley Psalm, let's just call it Hocking Hills Psalm. And it has an epigraph from Kierkegaard. Laughter is also a form of prayer. And I choose that for tonight because we've had some very good laughter tonight. Yes. Right? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
If you can't hear me, raise your hand, and if you get through listening before I get through reading, raise 2, okay? Do that, because I'm not good with microphones. I'm not good with anything that has technology. Right here, Lord, tether me to my shadow like a fat, spavined mule stuck sideways in tank mud, bawling for eternity. At midnight, when the stars slip their traces and race the moon like wild horses to their death in the darkness, let my hoarse song twine with the night wind. May the bray of today's laughter fall like a pitchy top branch from a tall yellow pine straight down to the mountain's bent and trembling knees. All right. This is a command performance. I was told what I was going to read tonight. Wasn't sure I wanted to do it. And then I read through the poem and thought, well, that's exactly what I want to do more than life. So, all right. This is a new chapbook. We talked in the class the other night about chapbook. It's a small book. Charge you the same thing you do for a big one, but you know, go for that. Often a chapbook are things that you think you like a lot, and you're getting ready to build a long book around that. It's the basis for a beginning. And also, a lot of chapbooks, you get a chance to do a really pretty little book. And I got one here. Whitney Staley illustrated this, and it has got some just amazing illustrations. When I get to the last part of the poem, there she is, talking to the undertaker. Okay? And that's just awfully. Yeah, but anyway, she did a very, very good job of it. This is called The Allegory of Perfection. I did have Plato in mind with his allegory of the cave. And I have a epigraph for the book from a character, Modine Gill. We are all only shadows on cave walls. So I'm going to read 2 sections from it. And then I'll just quit talking and read and let the poem do it for me. Perfection. Lily, I may need these. Lily McCree said the best way she could put it in polite terms was to say in his character makeup, Larry Joe Williams by birth deserved the Missed Congeniality Award, as there was no part of that element in any recognizable form or aspect present in or identifiable in his personality or behavioral modus operandi. Being so arrogantly narcissistic, he could not even aspire to political office below the rank of president. But who could have ever thought that it would be Dr. Harry A. Tubbs, the most morose and humorless man since Methuselah, who would crown the king in Larry Joe Williams' life checkers match? It all started, there's many people in here pretty close to my age. Somewhere around 65, you do start that once every 5-year colonoscopy syndrome. So I will tell you that what is said later was exactly what the doctor said to me after mine. So if you're offended by it, well, go talk to my doctor about that. It all started when he passed blood on the stool 3 days running after a night when he ordered the Lorange combination plate at Orville Benavides Cafe and told the waitress Eva Syens to make it a 7 on a 1 to 4 scale of hot, and bring him some jalapeno poppers for starters. Orville himself told him he ought to maybe eat some ice cream for dessert so he could have something smooth and cold to holler and pray for come morning, or at least put a wet toast sack on the doorknob as an emergency palliative. But Larry Joe, being the epitome of stiff-necked and uncircumcised of heart, said he had a cast iron constitution. It wasn't no jalapeno pepper he feared, which he ate with a passion worthy of Job and Jeremiah and the Apostle Peter that day on the roof at Joppa, during which he swept like Jesus, praying in the Garden of Gethsemane in the complete satisfaction of proving his manhood in front of the entire cafe assemblage, until he saw the dabbling of blood Whereupon he went into a paroxysm of panic-stricken weeping and wailing and gnashing of teeth, certain in his mind of minds he had been infected with terminal cancer of the colon, going as far as to proclaim from the pulpit at the Church of Christ on Sunday morning, prior to offering closing prayer, that he had been struck like the Apostle Paul on the road to Damascus with the burden of a cross he feared too heavy to carry alone. And he asked for the universal prayers and support of the congregation in his battle against the dark forces of death and destruction and uncertainty of the everlasting. Whereupon the aforementioned Lily McCree said, "Why the hell don't you just go to the doctor and spare us the histrionics?" And Larry Joe said, "Well then, I will." And God damn it, if he didn't go and do just that, raising a spasm of frenzy worthy of Mahalia Jackson at the memorial, and the reincarnation of Quanah Parker and Colonel Randall McKenzie at Paladuro Canyon inside the doctor's office, so that half the waiting room emptied out, saying they'd come back another day after the tornado cloud lifted, demanded a complete cancer inspection performed by an assembled team of world-class specialists brought in from as far away as Lubbock, as he feared his life to be in terrible danger. And Dr. Tubbs said, "Can you be at the hospital Thursday afternoon at 2? Larry Joe said, "I will be there if you promise I won't have to wait in line. My time is precious, and I may not have any too much to spare." Dr. Tubbs says, "First, I'm giving you a prescription. You go to Bob Collier drugstore to get it and follow all the directions." "What sort of subscription?" said Larry Joe. Dr. Tubbs said, "He will sell you 2 gallons of medication you swallow every drop of. 1 gallon the night before the procedure, and 1 gallon in entirety the morning of, preferably while sitting upright on the toilet, as the effects may be immediate." "What's in this prescription?" "I don't allow no foreign substance in my body," said Larry Joe. Dr. Tubbs says it's a secret combination of up to 42 ingredients, including croton oil, castor oil, 3-in-1 oil, and hydroexonerated concentration of X-Lax, designed to clean you out like a pig whistle, so you can shine a light up into your most private moments. When Larry Joe started to piss and moan, he said, "That is all. Do it or don't. And if you don't, stay home. Don't show up on Thursday, and let that be the first day of never again. I've told you everything you need to know. Bob Collier can fill you in on the rest. You do your part, and trust me, I will put my entire mind up to the very, perhaps non-existent soul into doing mine one time, perfectly." They said on Thursday he put on a show worthy of Euripides' Medea. Starting the very minute he walked in the door, de-sloshed, limp-kneed, and bow-legged, with a bellowing and and bluster, blow, gas passing on the complete and utter significance of this potential medical emergency worthy of the premature instauration of the second coming? Did they have the proper accumulation of medical experts at the ready? Dr. Tubbs said, "Get your clothes off and a gown on backward and lay down on that table." And Jason Gurr, the anesthesiologist, had him knocked down like a waterlogged raft in the world record time just to get him the hell shut up and start the procedure. When he came to, he said, "Am I gonna die?" Dr. Tubbs said, "Yep, but not today. Being that this is such a delicate and momentous importance, we are sending the burden of evidence straight to the Texas Capitol for the highest level of medical inspection and analysis so we can be perfectly sure in our final diagnosis." Larry Joe said, "What do I do until then?" "Whatever it takes." And Dr. Tubbs said, "Start by putting on your clothes and go home. Come back to the office next Wednesday afternoon at 3. I'll see you then with your final result." And Larry Joe said, "What do I do in between?" Dr. Tubbs said, "If I were you, well, I'd pray a whole lot about it with fasting, fear, trembling. Put some extra money in the collection plate Sunday morning for advantage." And he just turned and walked out with all the nurses and Jason Gurr, the anesthesiologist. The door left him sitting there, naked and dizzy. It took a seeming 4 years to get to Wednesday afternoon, with 9 telephone calls every day to the office, seeing if it was any news could be passed on, to where the office secretary said she could tell by the ring just when it was Larry Joe, and she wouldn't answer. And when he came to Dr. Tubbs' office on Saturday and Monday and Tuesday, they told him he didn't have any appointment. They were just real busy. He'd have to leave and wait his turn on Tuesday, even saying they'd call Sheriff Red Floyd if he didn't hold his noise down and go home and sit it out like a man. Come Wednesday, they put him in the room, closed the door, and let him sit and meditate over 42 minutes and 30 seconds until Dr. Tubbs and Jason Gurr, who asked on this special occasion to be called Dr. Gurr only with no amendation, and 2 nurses were in the room for the colonoscopy. Theona Josie and Amanda Hoskins all came in together. And Dr. Tubbs said, "Larry Joe, this has been something of a miracle." And he said, "Am I doomed for all time and eternity?" Dr. Tubbs said, "Not likely, for unfortunately a long period. As you have for the first time in known Garza County medical history achieved the level of absolute certified perfection in both areas of your colonoscopic examination. And in honor of that, we want to present you with this official proclamation given for the first time in our hospital's memory, printed special for the occasion at Dan Cochran Printing, where copies could be purchased individually for a nominal fee, creating a hue and cry for personal ownership. Signed and sealed by all in attendance at the procedure, here present, and as well by all members of the Garza County Hospital Medical Board of Directors, as well as certain other Garza County officials and dignitaries, and Nurse Fiona Josie pulled out the framed and signed certificate she had been hiding behind her corpulence and held it up for him to see. There's a picture of it. There it is. Certificate of Public Acknowledgement proclaimed by acclamation. Larry Joe Williams. Perfect shit. Perfect asshole. With all the signings below, including Lily McCree, Garza County Director of Libraries. And they said Larry Joe broke down, whimpered, and then bawled when he saw what they had done. Took him almost 15 minutes to pull himself together where he could take his framed certificate out to his car and drive home. So shaken, he couldn't even make it to Wednesday night prayer meeting. Got a hammer and a 16-penny nail. Hung the picture frame on the living room wall in front of his Barca lounger so he could make sure he could see it whenever he wanted, which was always. His wife came and went, soft moaning for a week, which he took for a sign of jealousy, for which he decided not to blame her until she finally told him she could not live in that house with that certificate in the picture frame in the living room. He would have to move it out to his shop or put it in the war chest. It was down to that or her. And she quit fixing dinner or supper to emphasize the point. And after 4 more days, he did. She said privately at the Curl Up and Dye Hair House beauty shop, he would go out and either sit or stand and stare at that framed certificate, and she could lip read him talking to himself. Perfect. They called it perfect. They said it and they signed it. Perfect. As if a god had descended and spoken. Post-mortem for a self-appointed deity. And this one has another epigraph from a poet I'm in love with, E. Cummings. And anyone died, I guess, and no one stooped to kiss his face. It happened on a Thursday. No one with a thought schedule for significance outside J.R. Potts Jr.'s door at the First National Potts Bank after he told his secretary, no, he did not wish to have a meeting with Larry Joe Williams without an appointment, hopefully 4 weeks in advance, to talk about anything, including an $8 million loan to start a building project, including a skyscraper taller than the 13-story Great Plains Life Insurance building in Lubbock for a town of maybe 4,000. with a 26,000 square foot storage facility that he said in a town council meeting could be converted and used as a banana terminal outlet on the high plains of Texas. If nothing else came along, it could be used for, or especially to have him come in and lobby at the bank his credentials of aspiration to become an elder in the Church of Christ. And though nobody in that church could vouch to his being an actual dues-paying Campbellite, even after he reminded in public J.R. Potts Jr. in his role and capacity as an actual elder, that his middle name, Joe, was actually an abbreviated mammariogram for Jehovah. That name, which no one seemed to have noticed, containing all three letters. His mother, incidentally, named Mary, and his father, being none other than Joseph Williams, gave him to honor his birth, along with the reminder that if the chips fell right, he could be president someday. And J.R. Potts Jr. should give consideration to being part of the instauration, that being his word of the day. So when the secretary said, no, absolutely not, he couldn't go right in without scheduling the in-advance appointment, final, case closed, pie, toot, hit the road, little Joe. Joe puffed up like a squat toad. She said it looked like his eyes would God smack right out of their sockets, like that avocado seed did when Roy Don Staley swallowed it by accident at the church picnic that time, showing off, and it flown 12 yards across two spread tables. Then he gurgled like he drank a cup of Drano, his face squished red and more swollen a teenage zit. Down he went in a bunch. All she could think of to say was, God damn. But it was too late for that. He was already stone dead, they said, before he hit the floor, apoplexied. I love it. Can you see this? I love the picture she drew for this. So I'm just going to hold it right here while I read this little section for you. When Larry Joe's wife said hello, Sheila Morris, the dispatcher at the sheriff's office who had been given the assignment, said, Mrs. Williams? She said, of course, this is my number, you dialed it. Sheila said, Mrs. Williams, I'm calling from the sheriff's office concerning your husband, Larry Joe Williams. She said, oh, who's he pissed off now? Is he in jail yet? Sheila said, ma'am, I'm very sorry to have to tell you that your husband is deceased. She said, what part of it? Sheila said, oh, he's dead all over, ma'am. Dr. Tubbs certified it a few minutes ago, and his body is on the way to Rufus Garner's mortuary. No, I mean, what part of him died first? Was it a heart attack or a brain spasm? Sheila said, ma'am, it could have been both. It was instantaneous. Dr. Tubbs said his mind was long gone before he hit the ground, right flat on his face, straight down. He wouldn't have felt a thing. Did he break anything I might have to pay for when he fell? It's too bad. I was fixing goulash, one of his favorites, for supper. And now, he won't get any of that tonight either. Hello? Is this Mr. Rufus Garner, the undertaker? Yes, I know he's there. No, I do not wish to identify the body. I'm sure you have the correct person. No, I do not want a funeral. Well, what's the cheapest way to get this done? Is that where you burn them all up? No, I don't want his ashes. Can't you do anything with them? No, I don't care. Yes, the water scattering would be fine. Why would you take them there? Don't you have a toilet at the mortuary? Well, then, how much will all this cost? You have to weigh? By the pound? I have a question, Mr. Garner. Is it too late to give him an enema? That could reduce the cost substantially. Sir, I don't understand what you're saying. As the Apostle Paul said in Philippians, I'm trying my best to work out my own salvation, but I'm just having a hell of a time with that fear and trembling part so far. No, sir. No, sir. No, sir. No, I am not a Sirius. I'm a Virgo. And I just want to get this all over with as fast and cheap as I can so that I will hopefully never have to think about any of this again. And I know my greatest fear is that there just might be an afterlife. And when it's my turn, he will be there waiting in the holding pen like a hog waiting to be fed. Yes, Mr. Garner, please do that and then send me the bill. When the insurance clears, I will mail you a check. Yes, sir, and best wishes to you too. Oh, yes, this is a goodbye. Thanks.